Hi everybody, welcome along to another episode of Monday Night Live. This is me desperately trying to grow another lockdown beard. My wife doesn't like it. She calls it the chastity beard. We won't go into the obvious reasons why she might be calling it that, just in case there's kids watching. But let's just say it is good to be back. I hope daylight saving is treating you well. We've got a really awesome show tonight. A special live guest, Dr. Chris Pemberton, has come back by popular demand. You guys asked for him, so he is back. Before I bring in Dr. Chris Pemberton, though, let me just get a couple of quick little administrative things out of the way. You're watching this show right now on our Facebook page for Monday Night Live. If you're not already a fan of that page, make sure that you give it a like right now. Also, don't forget about our YouTube channel. You can find that by opening your browser and going to mondaynightLiveshow.com. That's mondaynightLiveshow.com. Hit the subscribe button and the little notifications bell, and you'll get updated about all of our episodes. Tonight's episode will be premiering at midday tomorrow on that YouTube channel, and you can sort of share it and like it from there. A huge thank you to all of our patrons at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. You guys are awesome. It's thanks to you that tonight's episode and all of our episodes and our exciting new podcast is made possible. You guys are really, really awesome. If you're not already a patron and you like this sort of independent media and you want more of it, then please go to patreon.com/leftfootmedia for as little as $1 a month or as much as you'd like to contribute. You can ensure that more of this content keeps getting made. And as a special bonus, if you commit, you'll get access to exclusive content, but if you commit to the $5 and above tier per month, which is not much at all, cup of coffee, then you will get access to an exclusive patron-only weekly episode of the Dispatches podcast. So that's the first episode of that actually went live today, and these are episodes that are available only to our Patreon community. So that's another great value for money reason to actually support Left Foot Media. Right, with all of that out of the way, let me bring in our guest right now, and hopefully he's not powdering his nose. Dr. Chris Pemberton, welcome back. Good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, good to be here, no problem.
He says last minute checking his notes to make sure he's not going to say anything outrageous. Okay, we've got a few questions to get started with, Chris, but before I do that, I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to you. So just sit there and look pretty, would you, while I introduce you to those who might not have heard from you before. Dr. Chris, so that's Freudian. Dr. Chris Pemberton has both PhD and master's degrees. After completing his PhD on the biochemical forms of BNP and experimental heart failure, he travelled to Finland to gain postdoctoral training in isolated organ techniques. Upon his return to the Department of Medicine at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, he established the Isolated Heart Facility at the Christchurch Heart Institute. The main focus of Chris's research has been the discovery of circulating factors in the blood that could potentially be used to address the areas of unmet clinical need in the diagnosis and management of cardiovascular disease. In 2011, he was awarded the Health Research Council Liley Medal and currently heads the Translational Biodiscovery Laboratory, as well as being a member of the senior leadership team of the CHI. He is also CSO of the diagnostic company Upstream Medical Technologies, which he co-founded in 2015, and his current research focus is on developing tests for COVID antibody measurement and their potential application to population-based studies here in New Zealand. So without any further ado, and with that very long-winded introduction, Chris, it's great to have you here.
Mm-hmm. Good to be here, thank you.
Look at that, straight to the point. Now, we've had some questions come on already, Chris. By the way, just letting everyone know, please ask your questions. We want your questions. Tonight's a live show, so this is your opportunity to ask questions, and we will do our best to get to them. We've got some to get started with, but we want your questions. Chuck them in the comments section. Good evening, Lynette. How are you? Good to have you with us. If you want any questions at all about vaccines, about COVID-related stuff, this is a great opportunity to ask those questions. So, Chris, let's jump into a question that's come in already on the comments a couple of days ago, and it's this. Can you tell us, please, Dr. Pemberton, about the risk of myocarditis in young people from vaccines? And I guess that would be contrasted with COVID-19 risk factors for myocarditis as well.
Yeah, it's a topical issue, isn't it? So myocarditis after vaccination with any mRNA-based vaccine, which is the majority of the vaccines at the moment, has been recognised as a thing, as something to watch out for. And as far as I'm aware, on the reading I've done, it occurs at around about 5 cases per million doses. What we're seeing, that's myocarditis. That's specifically an infection into the heart muscle. That's separate from pericarditis, which is an infection into the protective sac and fluid that surrounds your heart. So it's about
is one worse than the other?
I can't answer that. I don't know whether you don't want either of them.
Fair enough.
Probably a truism.
Yep.
I'm not 100% sure on the eventual outcomes splitting those two apart. But with myocarditis in mRNA vaccines, it's running at about 5 cases per million doses. What's happened in the USA, they've gone and looked at it, and there's a number of publications in top-end journals like the Journal of the American Medical Association and other studies, and kind of scraped from reporting databases, and I've got no doubt the VIA's database and other things will probably come up in questions later on. That appears, the studies that they've done, it appears that with the mRNA vaccines that are being used in the US, so that's Mrna and Pfizer, they're running at about 10 cases per million for myocarditis. It's a little bit higher for pericarditis. Now, with regards to teenagers or young children, we don't have that data here in New Zealand. On the MedSafe reporting at the moment, I think it's around about 70 cases of myocarditis, pericarditis. They're lumped in together on the reporting on the MedSafe system. It's about 70 cases total that they've had, and there's about 3.9 million doses given. So I don't know, what's that, 16, 18 cases per million doses or something like that. But I don't know the split between the two. I don't know the numbers for teenagers. And if you look on the MedSafe website, the most recent bulletin they put out, I think it's 27, it shows that adverse events in children aged 12 to 15 have now been signalled as something they're going to look at. There have been no indications from what the Medical Advisory Committee has had a look at that it should be treated any differently to adult cases of events. So I'm sorry, I can't answer the question precisely in children. I don't know what the numbers are. It'll probably come to pass in the next few weeks, probably month or something like that. But heart inflammation, myocarditis and pericarditis, it is a known thing with the Pfizer vaccine, which is the one we're using.
Okay, here's a question from Jules Hickey. She said, what about myocarditis rates for people who get COVID versus the people who get it from a vaccination as a side effect of a vaccination?
That's a little bit controversial at the moment because a study that did a VIA scrape in the USA came to the conclusion that there might be a difference in favour of actually getting COVID versus getting vaccinated. But that's a preprint study, and you've got to take that with a lot of caution. And there's a lot of this stuff going on at the moment where people are looking at studies that have been put out before they've gone peer review. And you can't really take the conclusions because papers can sometimes undergo substantial changes in the data they present and also what their final conclusions are because reviewers point out fatal errors. So at the moment, I would say that the policy of getting vaccinated is probably the right thing to do at the moment compared with actually getting COVID because they're the same thing, right? They're both carrying spike proteins, and so you run the risk of damaging your heart if you get COVID versus the vaccination. So at the moment, the data does appear, apart from that one study, which is highly contentious, the data does appear to favour being vaccinated and primed to reduce the risk of getting some kind of myocarditis or pericarditis event if you do get COVID.
Okay, here's a question. This is coming tonight from Sue Reed, and I think also Mike Sullivan's touched on it here as well. If someone has had COVID and obviously recovered, can they still get the Delta variant, and should there be special exemption if you've had COVID and been vaccinated?
Excellent question. And some studies are now showing, basically what that's getting at is natural immunity superior to vaccinated immunity. And the data that's coming out now, there was a study of 43,000 people in Qatar who got COVID in the first wave. So that's the very first variant. And then they followed them out for 35 weeks, around about a bit over 7 months. That's 8 months, isn't it? Nearly 9.
Yeah.
And they looked at the reinfection rate, and the reinfection rate was low. It was around about 0.2, 0.3%. 2/3 of the people who got reinfected with COVID, and that's the Delta variant by this time, they didn't even know they had it. It was an incidental finding. Now, that's a fairly solid study, and it's been published in The Lancet. One of their, they've got a whole family of journals. It's published in one of their family of journals, and it's from a high respected team. So there does appear to be an emerging evidence base that if you had been infected with the first variant, alpha variant, it does give you fairly long immunity, of the order of a year. Now, in our study that we're doing here in Canterbury called the Cantata study, we've got individuals in that who got infected in March last year and one in October last year. And they've still got measurable antibodies in their blood, up to 18 months later.
Wow.
What that means, of course, is another matter, and that's going to take a lot of passing through, because what it means is that you've got a functioning immune system. That's what it means, outright. But what the long-term implications of that are, we don't know. We have to work that out. And there's a group of us, clinicians, myself, and our study coordinators, and we're going to get together in the next month or two and try and come to a consensus on what this might mean, because this question is eventually going to arise. We haven't had a major wave of COVID here. So the version of COVID we're going to get is Delta.
Yeah.
And it's going to come. Everybody knows that. And what we've got to do is to make it as least impact as we possibly can, because we don't want, disrupting the stories that we've seen overseas. Now, with regards to vaccination, if you've got natural immunity and you've got demonstrable antibodies, my understanding from overseas experience where they have had more cases of COVID is that they recommend that you do get vaccinated against the Delta variant, but you only get one shot. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a booster to your immune system. That is my understanding of the current practice overseas.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, isn't there? Natalie Mackay has asked, and I'll tie this to another question we've had as well. She said, would prednisone be a suitable treatment for COVID? I've heard nothing about that, but I'd be interested if you've heard anything. Related to that, someone else here asked in the comment section earlier, a couple of days ago, beyond vaccines, are there any prescription medicines available in New Zealand? So the person said, are there actually prescribable medicines available in New Zealand to treat a COVID infection?
So it's my understanding that at the moment, if you go into a hospital in New Zealand and you get COVID and you're quite unwell, and they need to give you something, the frontline medications that they're giving are dexamethasone, which is a steroid. It's related to prednisone, and I'm pretty sure they're using remdesivir, the antibody. I think that's in their armament. Now, there are a lot of medications that are coming online, but prescribable ones here in New Zealand, they're probably going to be based around things like dexamethasone or something like that. The key things are keeping electrolytes and glucose and basically your blood pressure and other things like that under control. And if they do that, they'll give you things like ibuprofen and paracetamol for pain or fever relief or anything like that. There has been a study in England called the Principal Study, which looked at budesonide, which is the active component. It's a steroid active component in asthma inhalers. and that reduced time with symptoms. So it actually hastened your recovery from COVID. And that study was published in The Lancet as well. So whether that enters the armament here in New Zealand, if the regulatory medical authorities think that that's enough, that remains to be seen. That's up to them. They're the experts. But certainly, it's pretty clear. I think dexamethasone and I'm pretty sure remdesivir is used. But Dr. Ashley Bloomfield talked about other drugs such as sotrovimab, which is an antibody, and he may have even mentioned budesonide, but there's an armament of treatments that the Ministry of Health is looking to beef up stocks of so that they're prepared when something happens.
Okay, here's another question from, well, actually, this might be related. We'll go to Philippa first, sorry. Related to the heart issue. I'm a runner, and I've heard from a friend's son in the good old USA that after getting either vax shot, not to run for some time, not to put the heart under any pressure. I guess that's the myocarditis, pericarditis thing, is it?
That's probably more common sense than anything else. Symptoms from being vaccinated can range from just having a sore shoulder to, being completely whacked out with influenza-like symptoms, which are quite common, and they're reported on MedSafe. So the advice to not overly do something, like marathon running, that's hard work. It's probably a good idea.
I won't have any problem sticking to that. I will definitely not run any more marathons. No, I think it's more out of being cautious and not wanting to overdo things. So that's more than likely the reason behind that. Okay, Monica, I'm going to ask you a question, but before I do that, Bridget, you asked a question a little bit earlier on. Can you just give a bit more clarity so I can ask Chris a more precise question? Thank you. Just a bit more clarity around what you're meaning, and we'll get that to him. Monica says, hi, Dr. Chris. Do you have any data on ICU hospital admission and vaccination status? And related to that, let's ask this question. You've mentioned the vaccine adverse reporting systems and stuff. There's been some critique of late about those. How reliable are those systems? Is it all just self-reporting? Is it checked properly? Can we infer anything from, because there seems to be a big spike in reports around this vaccine?
So to answer the first question there about ICU hospital admissions and vaccination status, I only know what's been publicly reported through Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, who said the vast majority of them are not vaccinated individuals. I think there was only I think when the caseload was up about 70 or 100 or something, he said only about 2 of them had actually received vaccination. So now that the caseload is over 1,100, I don't know what it is now. But I have to say that also they've been recovering at a fairly phenomenal rate as well. I'm quite impressed with the decay curve in terms of the spikes that are coming down. But I think it's pretty. I'm pretty sure it's the vast bulk of them are not vaccinated individuals. Now, with regards to the reporting system, any reporting system like VAERS or the reporting system, we have a system called CALM here, for Centre for Adverse Reactions to Medicines. It's a voluntary system, and so that it's usually up to the attending nurse or doctor or probably an admin person, because it's paperwork and nobody likes doing paperwork, but they have to do it.
Yeah.
But it's a voluntary system. It has been suggested in the US that VAERS only covers about 1% of all reactions. I don't know the truth of that. I only know what I read in the papers and the introduction sections that people report. I don't know what the underreporting in New Zealand is. I would not be surprised if there was underreporting. I just don't know the extent of that, and you'd probably have to talk to someone directly from CALM about that. They will have done an estimate of what the underreporting might be.
How seriously do you think experts would normally take vaccine adverse report data? Do they just use it as a rough guide? They say it's really reliable? Do they say if it spikes up, that should be your spidey senses should be tingling? How do experts look at it? If it wasn't COVID, what would they be saying, do you think?
I think they would they take all adverse reaction reports seriously. The physicians and anybody involved in that, they have a duty of care and they all take it very seriously. There are limits around what is tolerable. I'm not 100% sure on what those limits are, but I'm pretty sure that if there was a noticeable spike that they thought was outside the boundaries of what was considered normal run-of-the-mill population prevalence of certain things, they would go, hang on a minute, there's a safety signal here, and we have to pay attention to that. And then it's a question of the limits of tolerance and, what the pressing needs are. They're reporting what they see, and, I'm sure if there's something really bothered them, they'd say so.
Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Sorry, I'm just working my way through these questions here. Okay, Bridget says, how common is irregular bleeding for women as a side effect of Pfizer, and has anything been done to look into this? I experienced the side effect when my husband had his vaccine and have heard I experienced the side effect when my husband had, and have heard this is common for women in close contact with someone who has been vaccinated too. Have you heard anything like that? So she's saying I guess it's a side effect I've never heard anything like that. No?
It's kind of speaking to transmission of whatever the vaccine is making between partners.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting question. But with regards to menstrual irregularities or anything like that, that has come to an issue in the UK. Women were noticing changes to their menstrual cycle. It was reasonably short-lived, a month or two, and then it came back into cycle again. But they are now, there is, I think, tens of thousands of women in the UK reported it. And I believe that it got investigated after it was brought to light through a woman's magazine over there. That's my understanding of how it came to light. But they are looking at it now about potential causal links between vaccination and a short resolving issue in fertility cyclos in women. So it has been looked at.
Yeah, okay. So there's something that needs more study. A lot of people are asking about Novavax. We're going to get on to Novavax in just a second. Well, I didn't want this to make it sound like a party political broadcast for Novavax or anything, so we've got a few questions around that. But here's one from Andrew. He says, how safe are the Chinese and Russian vaccines like Sinovac, Sinopharm and Sputnik? Well, Sputnik didn't get to the moon first, so I'm not sure about whether it'd be getting us to COVID-free first. But what are your thoughts?
I honestly, I don't know enough about their results. I know that they've been used in Indonesia and a lot of other Asian countries and in Russia. I think their efficacy is perhaps not as good as the Mrna and the Pfizer ones, but they have prevented disease and they have controlled symptoms and things like that. And they have been a useful tool. I think they suffer from the same situation that Pfizer and Mrna and AstraZeneca and the other ones are. It's the question of boosters. I think that boosters are being suggested for those as well. I'm not aware of any reports that say these things are complete junk and don't bother taking them or anything like that. As far as I'm aware, they seem to function. They do what they're meant to do in parallel with Pfizer or Mrna.
Okay. Oregon has said this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only studies I've seen on COVID vaccines have been observational only, not randomized controlled trials. Does this limit some of the long-term conclusions we can make about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines? Related to that, Cal S says, what long-term safety data do we have on our Pfizer vaccine? What time frame is it at the moment?
I don't think it's strictly true. I think there are RCTs that have been done on the Pfizer vaccine. I'm looking here at the New England Journal paper. It's a placebo-controlled RCT, and they did random assignments. So I'm pretty sure that the COVAX one is the same as well. They are observational as well, but you can that's a separate sub-study on it. So they're pretty well studied in terms of the design with the initial reports. A key thing to remember is the urgency under which these were done. It's not like where they had the leisure of time. If you've got a new flu vaccine and you're trying to roll it out against the suite of existing flu vaccines, and there's no pandemic going on at the same time, needs create. What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So, they had to get on and get something out. Now that comes through to the next bit of what are the long-term safety profiles. As far as I'm aware, the Pfizer trial goes through till 2023. I think it is the end date. It's March or April 2023. The long-term safety profiles, we don't know. They've only been let loose in the last 18 or a year now, isn't it? So that is something that we're going to have to do. And I just noticed today, actually, I got a ping on my, us scientists, we're nerds, we get a ping when a paper of interest or a notification of interest comes up, and it comes up on your screen. You're kind of like, oh, that's cool, that Israel have now launched a big study looking, because they are totally, highly vaccinated with Pfizer. They've got something like 85% of the population vaccinated with Pfizer, and 20-something, maybe even more with boosters. They are now initiating a long-term study at looking at the medium to long-term effects. How long is medium and long-term? Probably somewhere between 3 to 6 years. Wow. Because most vaccines, under normal circumstances where there's no urgency, you're looking at a 6 to 10 year time frame before they get fully approved.
So this is really like when Trump called it warp speed. This really is warp speed, right? How quickly it got approved and put on the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it correct to say we are in an experiment then right now?
I think it kind of is an experiment. It's a very closely controlled experiment, because if it got too out of hand, then all hell would break loose, way worse than it has right now. But it is an experiment in the sense that the types of vaccines that have had to be employed rapidly in a rapid situation. And the other part of the experiment is it's worldwide. There has never been a vaccination program that's had to be rolled out worldwide like it is now. So I don't want to be critical of anyone. It is experimental, but at the same time, I think they're performing rather well given the speed with which it's had to happen.
Okay. Here is, let me get to this question here. A lot of people asking about Novavax. We'll come to that in just a second, team. Solomon says this, kia ora, Dr. Chris. For those who are choosing not to get vaccinated, how do you recommend that they look after themselves if they're in that situation?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. If you really do not wish to be vaccinated, despite all the information and looking at things that you can find, there are probably some remedies that you can take. I don't know how many of those are going to be available in New Zealand, because you see overseas people are recommending all sorts of things. Some of them are weird and wacky, and you should stay well away from. But there are other things. There is a group of doctors in America who have these protocols that they've worked up for home self-care. I mean, this is where Novavax comes in. I think a lot of the vaccine hesitancy and a lot of the worries are not necessarily about taking a vaccine. They're about the types of vaccines that are being employed. And I would really strongly encourage people to, if they're dead set hesitant about taking the Pfizer vaccine at the moment, they should very seriously look at Novavax. It does the same thing, but it's doing it with a proven technology that has been around for a year. They've been at this kind of technology for 6 or 7 years now, at least.
Okay.
It's more traditional.
Let's look at Novavax then, because there's quite a few questions about this. So first of all, Lynette said, is the Novavax vaccine really any different from those already in use? Isn't the spike protein still used in this vaccine as well? So what are the differences there?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It is the spike protein, but it's the presentation of the spike protein to your immune system that is primarily different. What the Pfizer vaccine does is it's linked to a nanoparticle, and it goes into your body, and it gets your cells to make the spike protein in the same way that the virus will do. It's trying to mimic the way the virus would naturally act. And so your cells are making the spike protein in the absence of everything else that the virus has got. So it's just the spike protein from there. So your immune system is going to recognize that your cells are making a spike protein, something that it's not seen before. Novavax doesn't get your cells to make anything. It's already got the spike protein in it. The spike protein is grown in the lab. So they take a thing called a baculovirus, which is a type of virus that can express and produce material, and they shove it into moth cells. Who knew moths were so clever? And their cells, these moth cells, in combination with the baculovirus, it makes the protein. And then in the lab and in the production facility, they clear out everything else, the moth cells and the baculovirus and everything else, and get the spike protein very pure. And I've seen the production protocols that they've had for that. It's very, very pure. And then they put that together with a thing called a sapin and TM. It's matrix M or something like that. It's their own unique formula, and it's based from the sapin and from a tree in Malaysia, which is actually a natural immune stimulator. So, and it's a proven immune system booster coupled with the protein. So when it's injected in your arm, you get the spike protein immediately present there, and it's kind of like if you cut yourself on a piece of tin, you can get tetanus or something like that from the rust and everything in the tin, because that's where it hides out. So your body looks at Novavax and goes, oh, I've been punctured by the needle, and then there's a foreign body that's come in. And so it's kind of working like that way in kind of like a tetanus booster sort of shot. And your immune system goes, oh, right, immediately, and attacks the spike protein. It's not recognizing the spike protein coming from your cells. It's recognizing the spike protein as something that's different existing in the tissue. So there's that different mode, but it is the same thing. It's the spike protein that it's raising antibodies to.
Safety profile of that vaccine?
Good, very good. I was looking at the papers earlier today. The safety profile versus, in terms of like adverse events or reports or anything that come out and people have received either one. The Novavax one, slightly different profile. There are less things in some parts of it compared with the Pfizer one. But the safety profile is very, very good. It's just as good, if not slightly better, than the Pfizer vaccine. Less side effects.
Availability it's not here yet, though, is it?
Yeah, you only have to go onto the internet, and there's a lot of people around the world crying out for this vaccine. They trust it a lot more, or they think it's a better thing. I personally trust it. I think the efficacy profile is better. I like the safety profile of it as well. About 3-4 days ago, the company Novavax filed their emergency use authorization with the World Health Authority, or the World Health Organization, I should say, sorry. And that is usually the first step in going for all the different country, regional jurisdiction filings as well, because nobody wants to be first approving it, right? Because everybody can turn around and say, oh, it was him or her or what they did. It's just the way these things work. And it's expected to pass. So when the World Health Organization gives its emergency use authorization to it, that will probably activate, I would say, within weeks. use application approvals in the Philippines, India, Indonesia. Australia is looking at it very closely. I don't know for certain, I get the feeling they are slightly more advanced in their approval of it than we are. We're not far behind. The UK is very interested in it as well. Israel has signed a massive deal to buy tons of Novavax for their boosters. So it's going to be in hot demand. I will be very surprised if it's not available in any of those jurisdictions I just mentioned within the next 2 or 3 months. The New Zealand situation, I know that the Ministry of Health and MedSafe are looking at it very, very carefully. There was Chris Hipkins went on the media recently and said that it appears that they're using Novavax for their booster system. Whether it's going to end up being an actual vaccination as well, there'll probably be people they've got to mop up and do that, and there's no reason why they can't do that with Novavax, in my opinion. So it would be a really good Christmas present, wouldn't it?
Okay, Alana's asked a specific question about it. In regards to heart issues and the vaccines, what would be the risks of vaccination with someone with coronary artery disease? Is Novavax a better option then?
I think if you've got coronary artery disease, I think the safety profile is okay. I mean, I'm not seeing any signals around that, and it's certainly recommended that Pfizer as well as Novavax have good safety profiles in that area. So I think the key thing here is it is important to get vaccinated for this, and certain issues are coming up, but Novavax and Pfizer, in terms of coronary artery disease, I think are reasonably safe. I'm not aware of any major incidences or anything in the MedSafe reporting that says that people with coronary artery disease are at any increased risk.
Okay, folks, those questions are flying in thick and fast now. It's great. Jules Hickey says, question for Chris, and I've heard this flying around a lot too lately. Some claim that mRNA vaccine is gene therapy. Is it true or false? It's a new technology, right? But is it gene therapy?
I'd probably have to say no. If my idea of gene therapy is to make a permanent change in something, and I don't see any evidence that these vaccines are making permanent changes in people yet. I don't know. It's going to be part of the long-term follow-ups, but I'm not seeing anything at the moment that these are gene therapies.
Okay. I've had a couple here come in that are raising questions. For those who might have joined in late, Dr. Chris Pemberton is a scientific research team leader based at Christchurch School of Medicine. So he's not running a medical practice anywhere in Christchurch, for those who might be wondering. But medical science is a specialty, and he's working on COVID-related research at the moment. Someone, I think it's Rustlin. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Rustlin. If not, apologies. It seems Dr. Chris is only pushing vaccines and quite hesitant to recommend alternatives. Rudy says, why has New Zealand not investigated all alternative options like the States and other countries, or does New Zealand just have tunnel vision? And someone else here asked, is ivermectin helpful as a treatment? So here's people saying, what about alternatives? Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's controversial. I totally get that. There have been a couple of, I'll deal with the ivermectin one. There have been a couple of studies that have come, reviews, meta-analyses that have come out of the American Journal of Therapeutics, and they view it in a favorable light. There have been randomized controlled trials of ivermectin in people who are in the hospital, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't reduced mortality. It's a sum zero kind of outcome. There are people who swear by ivermectin in the US. You go online and you see people who say that it works and it's fantastic and it's great. I have to be totally honest. I don't know whether ivermectin works or not. There is a study going on in England at the moment called the Principal Trial, where they're giving out, I think we talked about this the last time, And that's the same group of people who came up with the budesonide answer. And they've done other studies on other things that have been suggested as alternative treatments, and they found that they were negative. So these are people who've got no particular axe to grind or boat to row. They are objectively looking at the data and finding that. So we'll find out whether ivermectin is useful. There doesn't seem to be, I know people are keen to hear about alternative therapies and doing something else, but at the moment, the overall weight of the evidence doesn't suggest that, other than the ones that I talked about, like dexamethasone and remdesivir, there's an antibody called sotrovimab, which is a brilliant treatment. The data that I've seen suggests that it is an 85% reduction in needing to go into hospital, provided it's given early. So, it works. And there are other antibodies that are going on like that. So I understand people's frustrations, but the data is simply not there.
Okay.
And that's what we've got to focus on.
Okay, so you're saying you would want to see a bit more data before you'd...
Yeah, personally, I want to see more data. I understand that the people might have read the meta-analyses and things like that, but some of the studies were not designed properly, and the dosages are different. But I understand people's frustrations. I get it, but you've got to look at these things objectively, because you can't make a mistake.
All right. Janice says, I've heard overseas reports that Pfizer isn't working for the Delta variant. I would like to hear, Dr. Chris, your opinion on that.
Yeah, so Pfizer does reduce the severity of disease against the Delta variant. And just to remind everybody, the first time we talked, all of these vaccines are designed against the spike protein of the original variant. So the Delta variant has mutated into something slightly different. The Pfizer vaccine does work against the Delta variant, but there is evidence now of antibody levels waning, and such that by 4 or 5 months, the levels go down, and that's why they're talking about going to booster shots and things like that. Its efficacy against the Delta variant is not as good as it was against the original variant. That's no surprise, because it's a mutation of it. This is where Novavax comes in. The data I've read, that has a superior ability against the Delta variant. The efficacy in the original study that I read for Pfizer against the Delta variant was about 25%, whereas for the Delta variant with the Novavax, it's about 55%. So it does seem to have an edge on it in that way.
Okay, here's some people really some people hey that ivermectin, how dare you? So I want to get to this, because I want to get I'm genuinely interested in open journalism. This is neither of us are here to shill for anything. Okay, so we'll just be really clear about this. And everyone who knows and has been a regular watcher of my show and listener to my podcast, I'm not interested in censorship or any of that kind of stuff for the sake of censorship. So we want to have an honest conversation. I think that's been one of the great frustrations, right, Chris? It just hasn't been happening, honestly enough. So I do want to get to those questions. People are asking, and I will put them to Chris about ivermectin again. But Ziad has asked, do we know how long this virus actually lasts on surfaces? I thought that had been put to bed, but what's the story there?
Yeah, not long. Surface transmission has effectively been ruled out as a major means of mechanism. The major means of mechanism of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is aerosols emitted through nasal or mouth.
Yeah, okay. Here's someone else. They say, let me just, I'm trying to find all these comments here. So here's one related to the vax and ivermectin. So Charlotte sort of said, well, the vax is experimental and the data, I think, isn't there till 2023. Ivermectin doesn't kill us. So why are we okay to trial a vax but not a drug that is known to be safe in other, treatment protocols? There are heaps and heaps of studies on ivermectin. So I guess the question is, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Is it ethical to say, well, let's put people into an experimental vaccine phase, but we wouldn't do something with ivermectin, which is known to have a much more reliable and established safety protocol?
Yeah, I know that ivermectin has been given out to, millions upon millions of people, particularly in Africa, where it's used as an antiparasitic agent, which is, a big deal in Africa. They suffer from it a lot. I have to go back to, though, what I said before, the trials that prove it, they've got to be done in an appropriate setting. The data is coming. The trials are doing it. And if they come through, there are a number of trials. I know of at least 3 properly controlled RCTs that are going on at the moment that aim to finish their recruitment by the end of the year. If ivermectin is really doing it, you will get your vindication by the end of the year. Until then, we just have to wait.
Okay, so spoken like a cautious and appropriately scientific scientist, I guess, right? It's not about an agenda, it's about follow the data. Megan says this, I heard this tonight on the news in passing. Apparently it's been found in kiwi fruit. What a joke. Well, you're not wrong, Megan. I was chowing down on a kiwi fruit tonight. I got to get the cough. What does it all mean?
No, I think that was I think that was regards, they found it on a shipment of kiwi fruit in China. So it was clear when it left here. And then it went to some kind of transfer facility within China, and then it went to the next place, and they found it in the second place in China. And yet the story I read said that when it got through the Chinese customs, it was okay. So I don't know. It's one of those stories that you just sit there and smile and carry on.
Here's a question about Novavax from Maxine. Will Novavax be available for 12 to 15-year-olds? Maxine has asked.
Again, it'll probably have to go through the studies that are doing that. I do know that Novavax are initiating trials now to look at 12 to 17-year-olds. So they are trying to get that data as quick as they can. You've got to remember that it's only now, a year down the line, that Pfizer were getting approval for 12 to 17-year-olds or whatever it was. And once Novavax gets its approval and then gets released into the general public, then it will, undergo the same kind of. It may be a little bit shorter because they're probably going to watch what other people do and learn, the shortcuts. But that data will come in due course.
Okay. The net here says, why are positive PCR tests called cases? Cases are actually only those who actually become ill. Of positive tests, only a small percentage become sick. So what is the story there, Chris?
So the PCR test is it's an amplification system, and the way it finds something. You have a very specific, we'll call it a probe, and it latches on to the thing that you're interested in, and then it amplifies it so it can measure it. And every time it does that, it goes through cycles, and it copies it, goes to the next cycle, and then copies all of it that's there again. And so you get an amplification. You're going 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc. And you can utilize the number of cycles. Now, I can't remember exactly what the number of cycles that are used for a positive case here in New Zealand. I understand it's in the 30s. I've read a number of papers that say a PCR, it's called the CT value, cycle value. That's what the actual parameter is called, CT. I read a paper where these guys in Korea, quite early on, sampled from saliva and from nasopharyngeal swabs people who came into hospital with COVID. I mean, imagine doing that, having something shoved you've got COVID and someone's shoving up your nose every day for about 14 days. And they wanted to track how long the virus was actually lasting inside patients. And what they found was they never found live virus in anyone who had a PCR value over 30. That's published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year.
30 cycles.
A CT value of 30.
Yeah.
But you can still pick up remnants of the virus, the actual RNA from the virus. You can still pick it up at CT values higher than that. On PCR, going higher than 40, forget it. You could reproduce anything at it's not specific enough. You're just reproducing everything that's there, and it doesn't matter. It's meaningless. But within a range in the 30s, you can still pick up fragments of the virus that have been either through your body or you're getting rid of them, or in your poop, because it comes out in your poop for up to 90 days afterwards as well. And that's why they can look for it in the wastewater. It's a very, very specific and sensitive test. And when they talk about wastewater effluent, they can pick it up in those things. So I believe in the 30s, they're looking for an idea of whether you are a historical case or you're recovering or whatever. I believe that's how they use it. People might have seen in the media where they've talked about a PCR positive case, and they've said there's a bit of uncertainty, so they're doing it again. And that's them just trying to be doubly sure that they've got the result right. And because the CT test on its own is not taken as the proof that you have COVID. You have to present with symptoms unless it's very early on in the infection thing, in which case they're waiting to see if symptoms appear in you. There are some people who get COVID and don't get any at all. It's an important part of the process, but it's not the total be all and end all of it.
Okay, so
I hope I made some kind of sense there.
Yeah, I get that. So Charlotte here says apparently anything above 35 provides false positives. Is that true or not? OIA says we're doing cycles at 40. I guess that wouldn't be a good thing to do, right, at all. But
I have to confess I don't know anything about an Official Information Act request and saying that they're 40. If that's genuine, if that's what someone has asked the Ministry of Health and they're using 40 as the cutoff, then that's what they're using. Once you start getting above 35, you do run into a higher degree of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So
what about so Charlotte again here said the saliva testing. I've heard people talking about this last few days. Is one more reliable than the other? Is one an initial indication you'd have to get another one if you showed up on one version of the test, you do the second one to back it up? How does that work?
The saliva testing, there has been a lot of debate about that in the media. I read a couple of articles, and it's certainly more appealing to the subject being tested. If all you have to do is drool into a cup, it's a lot better than sitting there and having something shoved up your nose. It's my understanding that the saliva testing that is in use here in New Zealand and has been built up overseas by the New Zealand expat scientists, it's been heavily validated, rigorously assessed, and if done properly, it's just as appropriate and useful and realistic an answer as the nasal swab.
Yep. Okay. Billy Crocker has said, do you think a person should have the freedom to not have the vaccine until they feel safe? I know what my answer is, and but I want to hear what you think, Chris, about that.
Yeah, it's a raging question at the moment, isn't it? We have a Bill of Rights which suggests that it states, a person has a right to refuse any medical intervention or treatment or anything like that. The Bill of Rights doesn't override. It can be overridden by other law. It's not a be all and end all that circumvents every other law. Personally, I think if you have a very strong objection to receiving this vaccine, you have your rights. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. It's entirely up to you. You have to make sure that you're educated about it, and at the same time, people have they should have the freedom to make a decision about what treatment they want to use. There have been reports in the media from the Ministry of Health that they know that there's going to be somewhere between 5 to 10% of people are going to be hard to convince to get this vaccine. So I think they're going to have to engage with that community and find out what their real objections are, and try and respectfully get a dialogue with them as to why, because everybody wants the best outcome. And I think that's all I can say about that. I'm not in a position to preach about the rights or the wrongs of people's own decision making. If you don't want the vaccine, I can't tell you what to do.
Yeah, I'm of the same mind. I think there's lots of good reasons not to force people to have vaccines or any sort of treatment they don't want. The right to refuse extraordinary treatments is a standard. It's a staple of Hippocratic medicine for a reason. I'm actually going to do a podcast episode.
People. I would say that people have to get themselves educated. Though there is, you have to truly understand what's going on. You can't just blanket say, "I'm not going to take this." You have to give a reason as to why you won't. And so, I think. And that's why I said the ministry and that there's going to have to be this conversation. We all know this conversation is going to happen, and it has to be in a situation of mutual trust and just what's the word that they when parties enter, in it's kind of like a business thing when you go in and you're agreeing that you will disagree on some things, but you're doing it with mutual trust and respect and fair play and everything like that. People do have the right to their autonomy, so long as it's an educated autonomy.
Yeah.
Because there will be valid reasons.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, I've got an episode of the podcast, The Dispatch, is coming up where I'm going to look at this, because I think, in theory, you can make a moral case, I believe, but I think for compulsory vaccination, but I don't think it would apply in the COVID situation, because I think you have to meet 6 or 7 strict criteria to satisfy that, and I don't think we've met several of the key criteria here. And so, therefore, a person could still do their research, like Chris says, do a properly informed conscience, and I believe come to the end of it and say, no, I don't want to get vaccinated. My conscience is saying to me no, and they wouldn't be doing anything wildly out of proportion there. So, but yeah, we'll look at that in an upcoming episode. Let's look at some questions here. What's the difference with rapid testing? Is it reliable, says Sue? Rapid testing is available at airports in the USA.
Yeah, so rapid testing came out in the US last year, and Abbott and everyone had these rapid tests. When you're doing a PCR test, it's usually you get the answer at best within 6 to 8 hours, but usually you're getting the answer next day. Rapid testing was trying to give you the answer within 30 or 90 minutes. The first attempts at it were absolutely appalling, and Abbott had to recall a lot of their tests. They are much better now.
Yeah.
And so you can get a rapid test that'll give you, it's a rapid antigen test, and they will give you a fairly good answer within 15 to 30 minutes of whether you actually have the virus at the moment. And this has been mooted by the Ministry of Health now. And I have to say, I think they've done the right thing here. I think they cottoned on pretty early that some of these rapid antigen tests were not worth the paper that they were printed on. And now they're at a much better, more robust and more reliable state that they're looking to get them in. And that's handy if you're in a situation where you're wanting to go somewhere, or you need to get a test to get in somewhere. You don't have to wait till the next day. You can say, right, here's my sample. I'm going to go away and have a cup of coffee or something and come back in half an hour, and hopefully it's negative.
Okay, here's some. There's lots of questions tonight, team. This is great. Keep them coming. Oregon says, will the virus mutate?
I hope I'm helping people. I hope I'm helping people.
Oh, I think it's good. It's a discussion. It's a dialogue, mate. We haven't had much of that lately. A lot of people telling us what they think we should be doing. And both Chris and I are not interested in hectoring anybody. I have no interest in passing judgment on anyone for their particular decisions around vaccines, and it doesn't change my view of you in the slightest. And I hope it's the same for you. And if it does, then the problem lies with you, not me. Okay, so Oregon says, will this virus mutate into something more dangerous? Are the boffins down in the basement, are they worried about the next 3 to 5 years? I guess it's wait and see. Is it, Chris? What do you think?
I know a lot of boffins. Will it mutate into something more dangerous? I mean, that's always been a fear. At the moment, I don't think anyone is seeing something that it's more dangerous. They will be looking at this for the next 3 to 5 years. There's no doubt about that. But at the moment, I think the longer this goes on, if we go another year and we don't get this hyper-infectious, 28 days type strain that's going to wipe everyone else out, I think they'll have a lot more cautious optimism that this thing mutating into something more deadly is not going to happen. That doesn't mean that for certain groups in society that if this mutates the way that I'm expecting it to, it will become more infectious, but it will become less and less lethal as time goes on. And people have probably heard this phrase called endemic, which means that it becomes like the common cold, everybody gets it. However, there will still be a risk remaining. The common cold in an elderly, immunocompromised person can be pretty nasty. Any infection can be pretty nasty for them, so they have to be careful. But those cases hopefully will become very few and far between, and we're just going to have to wait and see, like you said, Brendan. I think the next 24 months are going to be very, very important.
Here's another question. By the way, folks, I've seen these comments flying in, people making points about the fact that a lot of people getting vaccinated don't seem to be doing their research either. And I think that's a valid point. A lot of people seem to be wandering around now thinking they're Superman because they've got themselves vaccinated. Here is a question from Mike related to that. My question was about unvaccinated being a risk to the vaccinated in two classes in the society, I guess, in terms of rights and restrictions. Chris, if I understand the data correctly, can you correct me or tell me otherwise on this, that you are not you're not necessarily a huge amount safer around a vaccinated person, right? They can still contract and pass it on.
Yeah, the evidence is coming out. You can transmit the virus even if you're vaccinated. I believe that and that comes back to the efficacy data that I was pointing out before. But the probability of you transmitting it is lower. There's no doubt about that. It does reduce your ability to do it, but you can still pass it on. And we're seeing that in Israel and other places like that. And Singapore now has had, since we last talked, Singapore has had a fairly major increase in cases, and they've had to pare back their restrictions a bit more as those cases rise, because they don't want it to put too much pressure on the health system. But the key thing with the vaccination is in Singapore, in the report that I saw on the Singaporean Health Ministries, 98% of the cases were either asymptomatic or mild. That's the key thing. That's what these vaccines are doing. They're reducing the burden of disease within an individual. And when you get enough individuals who have a reduced disease burden, it doesn't overload the health system. And that's a good thing. So now with regards to two classes, vaccinated, unvaccinated, that's a hot potato at the moment. And my own personal belief is it runs along the lines of you take two situations. If you've got someone who's not vaccinated, they're at an increased risk of perhaps getting a more severe case of COVID because they're unvaccinated. And you've got a vaccinated person, and the data is pretty clear that they're at a less risk of getting a severe case of COVID because that's what it's designed to do. So the vaccine is going to be protecting the person who's got it. And if they get COVID from the person who is unvaccinated, you would think that they have a degree of protection. In contrast to that, if the vaccinated person had COVID and passed it to the unvaccinated person, then you would think that they might have an increased risk of having a severe case. So it's going both ways. The net benefit of that should favour the vaccinated person. Where the problem comes in is if you don't have enough vaccinated people, then you end up with a situation like we had in Auckland, I think it was 2018 or 2019 with the measles, and that was fairly serious. They had an outbreak of measles there, and you had a lot of children who weren't well, and nobody wants that with us. We just don't want that. So with regards to vaccinated people being treated differently versus unvaccinated people, the way that that's presented at the moment is and John Key said it the other day, is a carrot and stick, is a method to try and get people get vaccinated to a level that the government is happy with. Should unvaccinated people be treated differently or not allowed to engage in society, domestic society? I get it for international travel because that's another country's demands then. There's nothing New Zealand can do about that. If another country says you have to be vaccinated to come in here, what are we going to do? You can't do anything about that. Yeah. But in terms of domestic ability, I do struggle with the idea that there is a difference there. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think it's going to bring the positive results that everybody wants. I don't believe it's going to be a productive strategy. I think that's why I talked before about the ministry getting out and talking to people about why they don't want to be vaccinated and everything, and engaging in a dialogue of mutual. I think that's going to be more beneficial, personally.
Someone's mentioned here the fear of 7,000 people dying. They're referring to the modelling that was released the other day. Look, I'm a layman. It seems a little high to me, though.
Yeah. I think that raised a lot of eyebrows around the country, and I think it's best if I left it there.
we won't put you in the professional quagmire there, then, Chris.
No. I looked at that and my eyebrows raised, and a much better model, and I think a model that I personally favour is one that was almost to the day published in Lancet by other New Zealanders. So it had David Murdoch, who's the head of the clinical school here, Nigel French, Jörg de Wit, who's the head of the ESR, Michael Baker, and a bunch of other people. And the numbers in that model were based around vaccination and what the health system could expect. And that was a really solid, robust piece of evidence. I paid more attention to that.
Here's a question for you, a couple of interesting ones. One is this the booster shots question. A lot of people talking about boosters, but then in the last 2 weeks, we had a group of, 18 out of the 20 scientists on the FDA advisory panel who voted against recommending booster shots at this stage, the FDA doing that, because one of the things they said was, among others, that they don't think we've got enough safety data yet to be doing that. Israel has gone ahead and has started boostering people. What the heck is the situation? Are they necessary? Are they safe? Is the data still unclear?
I think the data is still unclear. The Israeli data that the FDA was talking about is this paper right here that I was reading earlier today. And they looked at 1 million people, and they had them cut into people who they'd had 2 doses, and then they followed the people who they gave the 3rd booster shot to versus those who didn't get it. And what they found was that the people who'd had the 2 doses originally of Pfizer, the efficacy of the vaccination had dropped in them getting disease. Now, we know that. The studies all around, this is nothing new. With the booster, there was a 10-fold improvement in terms of the efficacy. There was far less disease, and there was less severe disease as well. And so that was taken as evidence that the boosters were actually helping. When you look at the paper, they only followed people for a month. It was basically all of August this year. So it's kind of a very short-term effect. How long that booster effect persists remains to be seen, because what are we now? We're October, so we're only 1 month further on. I would be expecting follow-up data from this paper at, say, 4 months and 5 months, when we know that the Pfizer effects are starting to wane from the first 2 doses, or any vaccination that you're getting. So we'll just have to wait and see. But certainly in that first month, if it's, I guess Israel were thinking if we do this and it improves, it reduces the burden of disease, it's going to help our health system, because they had some fairly horrendous numbers. They were having the highest peak they've ever had in the whole course of the pandemic. And I think New Zealand needs to take really close attention to that, and also to the situation in Singapore, because they're both highly vaccinated countries that were largely COVID naive. Israel less so than Singapore. But I think those particular jurisdictions can tell us a lot about how things might go eventually here and what we need to do about it. Now, the efficacy of the booster shots, the 16-2 vote or 16-3 vote or whatever it was, and then they eventually approved it for people over 65, I guess you were just going to have to wait and see what that does in the US. I think cases are dropping in the US at the moment. I don't know. We'll wait and see.
Were you concerned at all? One of the things that got mentioned by one of the experts, medical experts, who they all zoomed in for their little, I guess their keynote, little 5 minutes they had each. One of them said, or several of them mentioned, a sort of bullying by the pharmaceutical companies to try and just push in this direction, that needed to be resisted so scientists could do their job. Do you think that's a very real risk in this current climate?
Is that what someone said in the FDA meeting? Yeah,
one of the Zoom calls. In fact, I think a couple of them mentioned that they felt that there was they were saying, look, just get booster shots and get it done. And they were saying, hold on, that's not, you don't get to do that. That's the scientists have got to look at this properly before any decisions are made here.
I think that's the valid response. The scientists, have got to look at the data and see how it goes. I can't comment. I didn't see the proceedings. I only read about the vote, so I don't know whether someone said that or not. But if that person honestly believes that's going on, that would be concerning, right?
Yeah. Grant has asked this: where is the mutation coming from? And this relates to a question someone else asked earlier on. It's not coming from Twizel, Grant, so we can rule that out. But where is it coming from?
Twizel's all right.
Someone said earlier on the comments, someone referenced Gert van den Bosch, and I know he's someone I watched an interview with him. I've read some of his stuff. Let me quote, he said, and this guy's highly regarded in his field. He's not a tinfoil hat wearer in his basement. He says mass infection prevention and mass vaccination with leaky COVID-19 vaccines in the midst of the pandemic can only breed highly infectious variants. Do you have any thoughts on that theory, that hypothesis? Sorry?
That was a lot of words, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I guess what he's saying is that, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like he's saying that while you're in the middle of a pandemic and that you are delivering suboptimal vaccines, that you increase the risk that you're going to get mutational variants springing out that will be resistant to those vaccines, thus driving the mutation rate. I'm asking a question. Does that sound like what he's saying to you?
Yeah. And it seems, from what I understand of what I've heard and read from him, is that he said that these vaccines in the midst of a pandemic will create, because things are leaking, you cases, I guess, as and you can get transmission. You're putting an evolutionary pressure. So normally, right, the virus would kill hosts or mutate weaker, but you're actually enabling hosts to survive longer. So you're creating an incubator environment that wouldn't exist otherwise for the virus to actually mutate in a worse way.
Yeah. That's what I took from it too. I don't really know about that. I'm not. The whole mutational pressure and virology and the evolution of this kind of thing, that's not an area that I'm even remotely competent in. What I do know is a paper that I read where these Japanese researchers looked at the Delta variant. And so when you make antibodies from the vaccine, it's against the part of the spike protein that binds to the receptor on your cell your antibodies block that to stop it binding in. But you also make antibodies to what's called a supersite, which is at a different part of the spike protein. And that the Delta variant seems to have a supersite that when it's bound by these antibodies, it enhances the binding of it to your cells at the other side on another part. So it seems to be that the Delta variant does have this ability to be able to utilize the entire antibody production that you're doing, that your body is generating, to sort of enhance its ability to bind to cells. That might be what Dr. Van Bosch is talking about. But I can't really answer that question. I'm not even going to attempt to do it justice. It's a valid question. It's a great quote from a guy who clearly knows what he's doing, and I'm not going to help anybody by trying to make a comment on it because it's probably going to be wrong.
Now, I know some people are going to be frustrated by that, but that's smart. We do a bit more of that.
Well, if I don't know something, I'm not going to try and fudge it through. But if I don't know, I don't know.
We'll do a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap things up because we're already at 9:15, and I know Chris has got to get on with his life and got to go back to work tomorrow morning. Here's a couple of people have asked this type of question. I'll go to Helen here. What about preventative measures, daily doses of oral zinc, vitamin C, good hygiene? I had nerve damage 12 months ago from a few severed nerves, was diagnosed with CRYPS, but after getting high dose vitamin C, the symptoms decreased significantly. We can't rule out historic go-to vitamins and natural remedies. Someone else has said here, someone has asked, and I've lost it, sorry. Jenny actually asked, what about vitamin D? Was what Jenny's question was. I know that that people have been talking about that. So yeah, what do you have any thoughts on that sort of stuff? Here's Jenny, sorry, Kira, Dr. Pemberton. She says, do you have any thoughts around vitamin D exposure and building natural immunity? I've also heard zinc and vitamin C. What are your thoughts?
It comes down to the whole personal health and wellness issue. Anything you do that improves your health, exercising, getting out in the sun, supplements like vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc. There are a number of studies out there that I've looked at that have assessed countries where vitamin D is given. So in the Scandinavian countries where they give vitamin D to kids, and you can get vitamin D supplements because of the lack of sunlight. Because I lived in Finland for 2 years, and for 3 or 4 months you don't see the sun, and it's an interesting experience.
You would have been Frosty the Snowman, wouldn't you, mate? After that,
I don't know what it was. I thought I was going to turn into a leprechaun or something. It was and so they give vitamin D as supplements because it's an important vitamin that your body needs. And they've done studies looking at large population bases where, and then they've cut the individuals within the study according to their vitamin D levels. And there does appear to be an association between, if you get COVID, how severe it is, and the amount of vitamin D you have in your system. You can't make a causal claim that vitamin D is knocking COVID on the head. But if you have vitamin D and vitamin C and other supplements on board, or these levels are maintained, and you're as part of exercise and looking after yourself and all the whole 9 yards that people should be doing to look after themselves, you don't seem to get as severe a disease. And I've read at least 10 studies now on over millions of people that they've looked at, because they've had entire population bases to look at. And there does seem to be an association with higher levels of vitamin D and how severe your COVID will be. It won't stop you from getting it, but it does seem to help. It's probably boosting your immune system in some way, along with vitamin C, and it gives you a good head start. And if you do get it, along with vaccination or whatever, you've got a better a better start than people who don't have such high levels of vitamin D and things like that. So at the moment, because you can go into the supermarket and buy wellness products with vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc and everything in them, and they're reasonably benign. They wouldn't be available in the supermarket if they weren't benign in terms of adverse events and things like that. So talk to your GP about it if you want to. Talk to the pharmacist, but I can't see the harm in it, really.
There's been long-standing, as I understand it, sort of health advice from the medical community for years, long before COVID arrived, that if you're living anywhere south of the Bombays in New Zealand, that from I think it's sort of, they recommend around March to the end of August, you should be taking a vitamin D supplement,
right,
because you don't get as much sun at that time of the year.
Most vitamin D in people comes from exposure to sunlight, right? You get it on your arm or your exposed skin, and you produce it that way. But like I said before, it's we've been in, particularly Auckland at the moment. They're still in lockdown. It's hard to get out and walk around, and we've had winter and everything like that. I can't see. If you're concerned, please do take medical advice or pharmacist advice. But as a general rule, I can't see too much harm in it.
Okay, just two questions to finish with for you, Chris. One is, Kathy said, what is the safety protocol? I think she might refer to vaccines, maybe, with people who have lowered or compromised immune systems. Can they take vaccines, Chris, or not?
Yeah, I think they can, and it's interesting because I have a colleague at work who has actually I've got two, who have compromised immune systems for different reasons, and they were concerned about taking the vaccines, not from the point of view so much of adverse side effects, but because their immune system was compromised, would it work? Would they generate enough antibodies? And there's a few studies out there that suggest that it's no more harmful to take the vaccine compared with the rest of the population. And with regards to antibody production and success of the vaccine actually producing an appropriate response, that's probably something that's going to have to be studied a bit more in populations. And for that, you really need antibody testing. And antibody testing, I think, is something that we really need to do in this country. The whole issue of vaccine passports and successful vaccinations and everything, antibody testing is going to be crucial going forward for giving us a more accurate picture of where we're at, particularly for people who are in a situation of immunocompromisation.
Yeah. Yvette Lee Watson says, hi, is there any risk for women with menopause? Now, I'm assuming that's a vaccine-related question there. Do you know of any research around vaccines and menopause?
I don't believe there's any risk. I work with a lot of women at that time of life, and they've had the vaccine, and I'm not aware of any reports that state there's any increased risk for women at that age of life.
Yeah. Okay, well, gosh, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think one of the great uncertainties is all the uncertainty, right? And it just leaves so many people saying, well, as someone actually said on here earlier, look, these guys have lost a lot of credibility and trust with me with the way they've conducted themselves. Not us, the sort of the establishment, if you like. And I don't think that's, I can understand that. I totally understand that. The cynical Irishman in me says, yeah, you go first. It's not easy, right, at the moment for a lot of people.
It isn't, and I think it's important that whatever pans out, you approach it in a reasonably calm and measured way. I know that tonight I've probably given some people answers that's made them more confused, and I've answered some questions to people the way they didn't want to hear it, but it really should be data driven, and we have to make decisions. And the people who are making the decisions are making it based on the data and the actual facts of what's going on. I'm talking about the medico-scientists here. I'm not going to get into the politics of it. That's a different story. But you really do have to look at what the data is telling you and interpreting it correctly. And those are key things, because if you stray away from that, the consequences of not appropriately assessing the data, they could be horrendous. So I think that's a key thing.
Yeah, there's a lot, isn't there, is it too? And I think those who've been listening to my podcast will know that I've said we're also, there are some people who desperately want a political panacea to get themselves out of this. And all of that plays into it, eh? And I mean, in the field of research, I think you said this to me last time, you haven't seen a more highly politicised environment in this space.
No. And I understand, like I said before, I understand why it's politicised, because it takes politics and science to get out of it. But, we're far enough along now, and we've seen enough of what works and what doesn't work going on overseas, and people are frustrated. And the government has finally admitted that we can't go on locking people down. It's counterproductive.
Yeah.
There's the personal aspect of it. There's the economic aspect of it. And we've got to get out of this thing. And that's why they're pushing on the vaccination drive, because that's one piece of the puzzle to get out of it. So yeah, there's a lot of more water to go under the bridge, I think, though.
Here's an interesting question, just before we do a few admin things, and then we'll say our farewells, Chris. Bridget said, is there a need for 100% vaccination? Why not just leave the 5 to 10% alone? One thing that's sort of fascinated me is initially we were told sort of 75 to 80% was the magic number. Now that's changed. It's some articles of late, experts are claiming overseas, we think we need 95%. Are we going to get to a point where we say, maybe this ain't working? Are we Sisyphus on the vaccination treadmill? I don't know. Is there a point that,
I don't think in any society 100% vaccination is possible. There will be pockets of people who, I'm not criticising, I'm just saying that there will be pockets of people, it could be for any vaccine. It could be any treatment who will not, and they will have their reasons. They just won't get vaccinated. And you notice that the government has said we wanted, I think they started with 80 and then they wanted 90. And there's all these media things about now the Project 90 wanted to get 90% vaccination. That inherently implies that they know that 10% of the population is probably not going to be keen about taking the jab. So these are all the trade-offs that have to be made, right, between trying to do something that is in the benefit of the country, but also at the same time not wreaking havoc among the population and creating more problems than you had in the first place. So there will be a group of people who are hard to get, and that comes back to what I talked about before. I don't want to rehash that. So I think 97%, I think, was touted by one group as a thing. I mean, that was never going to happen. You just simply won't get that.
Bridget, I should just say here, neither of us are wishing to do this. She said it's a shame that the bleeding issues, this is the postmenopausal thing again, seem to be getting dismissed here. This is an ongoing trend with male-dominated health/medical science that women's health issues are ignored. I think, funny, actually, I read an article about 10 years ago about how they used to test drugs and other things on male lab rats only, and then they realised when they got them to market that there were issues with females, so they have to actually they couldn't just treat females as another version of a male. But we're not trying to do that here. And I know yourself, you've mentioned a Facebook group for women who are postmenopausal who are experiencing long-term bleeding. If anybody's asked questions or is interested, go to those groups and start sharing. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Chris? Those groups are how the initial conversation happens, and then officialdom slowly catches up when enough people say, hey, there is an issue here that you're not seeing.
Yeah, no, look, I'm sorry if I gave the wrong impression there that I'm dismissing it. I'm not dismissing it. Women, they know themselves, they understand, and they are personally, no one can dispute what you are saying. All I'm saying is that I heard that there were cases of menstrual irregularities after having had the vaccines in the UK. and that now it's come to the fore and people are looking at that. I'm not trying to dismiss that those things have happened. They're real. People are experiencing those side effects. But I don't know what the long-term consequences of those are. I do know that for the vast majority, from what I've read, the symptoms resolve after a month or two. If there are ongoing issues, like Brendan said, there are Facebook groups and other people who are experiencing those issues. They are the best people to talk to, because I can't offer anything more than that. But I'm not dismissing that those things are happening.
Folks, Chris, you stay there right there, because I want you to, we'll come back and say your goodbyes in just a second. Tina and a couple others have mentioned this. They said maybe you should think about getting Dr. Peter McCulloch on. He's actually on my list of people I'd like to have a conversation with. He's certainly had a bit of profile overseas with this, and he seems to be, his big focus, as I understand it, is on treatment protocols. He's fixated on trying to find treatment protocols that can actually help people. I think that's a good thing at a time like this. So yeah, those who have mentioned his name, I'm trying to reach out to him. Just a couple of quick promos, then we'll come back to Chris to say our farewells. First of all, don't forget the Dispatches podcast. And if you are a patron supporter in the $5 or more tier for Left Foot Media, you get a free exclusive weekly. We get an exclusive weekly episode of the Dispatches podcast that no one else gets. The rest of you, there are a couple of episodes a week that go on to Spotify, iTunes, and all the regular places. So yeah, that's a little bonus. So if you want to see more of this, you want to see more of this content, you want to see more of this sort of independent, engaging, and informative style that we're trying to adopt here at Left Foot Media, then please support us at patreon.com/Left Foot Media. Every little bit helps. Next week on the show, I'm going to be speaking to Peter Holmes. Peter Holmes is an academic who's based in Australia. And the topic of conversation is what the heck is going on in Aussie right now. It's some troubling behaviour and worrying stuff from the governments, particularly in Victoria. So we're going to be having a conversation. And Peter is a keen, astute observer. The first time I met Peter, we were speaking at a conference together. We both got picked up at the airport together in the same vehicle, and he had a shirt on that said, "Make Orwell fiction again." And I thought, this is a man after my own heart. And so, an academic based at Notre Dame University in New South Wales. We're going to be talking about the social upheaval that's going on in Australia and what he might feel about all of that. Chris, Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you back. And I apologise, team, that we didn't get to all of you. There were so many questions came flying in. We didn't have time. There's so many on the to-do list still that didn't even get touched. So maybe we might have to do this again at some point, Chris. Thank you so much, Chris. Is there anything you want to say to people before we wrap up tonight?
No, it's a pleasure being on the show. Thanks for having me. I just hope I've answered the questions that we did get to, and I hope I've answered them. And I think a key thing going forward is people need to remain positive. We will get through this, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And just keep that focus in your mind. And I'm happy to take any. You've got my contact details, Brendan. I'm happy to take any other questions on email or anything else that if somebody wants, and if I can be of any use of pointing someone in the right direction for something that I can answer, I'm more than happy to do that for them.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. Chris gets bombarded with spam texts from me almost every day. What do you think about this? Tell me about this. And he's my go-to personal science advisor on tap. So there you go. Another reason to support Left Foot Media. We're gonna pay a high-profile science advisor. So I've got to pay him in beers. Chris, thank you so much. And I know a lot of you. I'm seeing the feedback coming in now. You're appreciating the tone and the tenure of the conversation. Let's keep it civil. I've been really frustrated by the toxic us versus them that's evolved around this, and particularly I have to say at the moment it's being directed towards those who are vaccine hesitant. I don't think that's fair and it shouldn't be happening, so let's do our bit to not return the favour. Let's try and keep it as civil as we can with each other. You guys are awesome. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Ta-ta.
When we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. All the good times just begun. Oh, we know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future is bright.